Rikus and Eleonora Terleckienė, who discussed with us the topic of the presentation and gave questions to Maria what is interesting for them and for Lithuanian paragraph studies in general. So I'm very glad you are here. And the floor is yours, and let's listen to the presentation. No, I think it's better for you. Yeah. Like this?
Sin luz para nosotros.
Vale, sin luz está bien. Yo veo bien. Okay, let's see this. Right. Okay, so thank you very much for being here in person, online. For me, it's a pleasure to talk about, as I like to say, my Jesuit, because I have been studying him since my master's. So I studied other things and researched other things, but it's like once in a while I come back to him. So I first started with the Iphigenia, the tragedy, then I go to the Andromache, and I start a little bit other minor drama plays or operettas. And the last thing I researched about him was the personal letters. So today, what I want to do is like a kind of hybrid talk. So go through the private letters first. They are focused on the French Revolution. That was the topic, but now I would like more like present him, the context, the family, and then see how little bit of him through the letters. And then the second part of my talk will be about the neoclassical dramas. So yes, so thank you for being here, and especially for my students that after all the semester want a little bit more of the literature. So yes. Okay, the first image I choose is the portrait of. Are you sharing? Yes, I'm sharing. It's a portrait of Ignacio de Loyola. And yes, it feels curious because, as you can see, you have in that moment like 4 figures representing the 4 continents, and for me, it's quite exotic because it's like a portrait for a religious person, but then you have 2 women naked and representing just like a different culture. So, of course, Europe is like properly, let's say, like properly dressed, and the others not. So, yeah. Before talking about him, this is Manuel Lassala. I think by the moment is the only portrait we have, so you can see him. So Lassala is included in the group of the expelled Jesuits who were banished from Spanish King Carlos III in 1767. And when he was still a seminarian, he was exiled to Italy, precisely in Bologna. And there in Bologna, he completes his studies and his training as a Jesuit. And furthermore, Lassala developed his literary career during his exile. And because of that, he's considered an Hispanic-Italian author. So he wrote mostly in Italian, Spanish, and Latin. While he was in Italy, Lassala maintained an active correspondence with his mother. They were very close, Inés Sangermán, along with other family and friends. Adelante. So for the new audience, Ignacio de Loyola and Manuel Lassala. And now I'm presenting him. So, as I was saying, when he was in exile, has maintained an active correspondence with his mother and other family and friends. And some of the letters addressed to the French Revolution from the point of view of a noble family. In addition to discussing family matters, is for that. For me was quite interesting. I discovered the letters when I was researching the tragedy. I know they existed, and then some years later I came back. So then if you have an interest, I can tell you about the manuscripts, where they were, and how to work with manuscripts and things that are not in a proper catalog in the library, because maybe some of you know about it, but maybe some of you, especially the students, you are not very aware. So how to work with manuscripts, how to find them, and all of this. So the Lassala Sangermán family writing their letters about the horror they feel about the king and the queen of France, Marie Antoinette, and Louis XVI have been executed. So that for me was very curious, because I think we all learn about French Revolution with the textbooks, like the official history. But for me it was super interesting how a family wrote about this, like a daily thing that was happening, and they were afraid about that, and afraid of the family that were abroad, and how they felt the world as they knew was falling apart. Because I don't know in Lithuania, but in Spain, when we studied the revolution and so on, the French Revolution is like, okay, it's the start of the democratic era and so on and so on. So it's like we have that phase. But when you are in the other part of the society, you really can feel very frightened about what is happening to you, to your family, to your relatives when you are in the high society. So yeah, now I will talk a little bit about Lassala in the exile and the French Revolution, and then I will show to you some extracts of the letters and the content and so on. So Lassala was born in Valencia in 1738, and also dies in Valencia after turning back from the exile in 1906. So when he was 68 years old, and he spent 32 years of his life in the exile. So I will show you something about Lassala's family nowadays. So Lassala's parents were Don Bernardo Lassala and Inés Sangermán, and they were married in 1751, have 5 children. And the father of Lassala was Sire of Béarn in France, also had an administrative position in the king's court, and also was another man. But Lassala's family is still alive. They still have their palace in Valencia. They still live there. As I know, then we can tell more about this. It's like Gitana is because you have seen it, I guess. So I will show you the square later. So the last member of the Lassala family, I think he's my age. I won't reveal it that exactly, but we are the same age. He is now an architect, has an architect studio in Valencia, and also they have been architects for a while. So the palace is there, that the facade, and that the interior, because I think nowadays you can hire some spaces for having events and so on, but the family is still living there. And this is the square where is the palace. So it's called Plaza del Negrito. So the palace is Lassala's palace or Negrito Palace, and it's called like that. Negrito is like little black boy because the material of the fountain, and that was the first fountain in the city with drinking proper water. So it's like we are not talking about the 18th century, but the family still has a position in the city. It's not like has disappeared. So in Valencia, La Sala studied at San Pablo Seminary of Nobles, and that's still on place also. So in that moment was for noble families, and today is for the one who know Valencia is the high school Luis Vives. So now it's a public high school, but I think has the best reputation of public high schools in the city and in all the community. So that was in the times of La Sala, a little bit later, and that's nowadays. So he studied there. Then go to the university, studied philosophy for 3 years, and after obtaining the bachelor degree, he moves to Catalonia, and then he started his novitiate in the Jesuit College of Tarragona, continued the studies in Manresa, and later come back to Valencia, studied theology, and then had a specialization in ecclesiastical discipline, canon law. And then, in addition, he was teacher of grammar in Calatayud, Zaragoza, and teacher of rhetoric and ancient Greek here in the same place he studied. And nowadays, still this high school has a good reputation in teaching of ancient Greek and Latin. So it's like something that has prevailed on time. So in March 1767, after the expulsion of the Jesuits from Spain, La Sala must go to the exile in Italy. And on the night of March 31, in the 31 of March to the 1st of April, all the members of the Society of Jesus were expelled from Madrid, and the next day from all Spain. So the expulsion of the Jesuits from Spanish territory was planned like in the greatest secrecy. But however, it seems that the main causes of this expulsion were that the ideology of the company was confronted with the policies of the king, Carlos III, like the regalistas in Spanish, because the king thought that the royalty need to have the highest power, especially referring to the church affairs, and the Jesuits have been having a lot of power, and also, and especially in education. That still applies nowadays. When the Jesuits came back to Spain, they specialized a lot in education, high schools, teaching, and so on. And still nowadays, they have a great reputation in teaching. I think the same with the Jesuit lyceos here in Vilnius. So, so they were expelled from Spain. Also, they were expelled before from France and Portugal.
The same as well.
So he passed through Ferrara and resided for a year in Corsica, and then he settled in Bologna, and he continued there his academic training, standing out above all in the study of languages. So he studied Italian, Portuguese, French, English, Spanish, Latin, ancient Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, and also Lemosine, that is a kind of Valencian, Catalonian, Occitan language. He adapted perfectly to the life in the city and the Italian culture, and became a member of various academies in Bologna, especially Arcadia Academy, that was very popular, and many intellectuals of this period belonging to that academy. While Lassala was in exile, the French Revolution broke out, and that, as all we know, closed the French Revolution closed the modern era and shaped the previous regime. So the feudal regime was still in force in France when it happened. And also, this event will give away the power of the bourgeois in detriment of the nobility. So although this is not reflected in the fragments, also the French Revolution affected the Italian Settecento and also the context of Lassala in Bologna. But we don't have the letters Lassala wrote. We only have the letters he recited that nowadays are in Valencia in the historical library. But we don't know about the one he wrote. Maybe they are in the palace.
Maybe they are in his house.
Yes,
With family.
that will be probably. So Lassala had been in exile for 20 years when the revolution began. And from Bologna, he maintained contact with family, friends, religious people, and intellectuals and historical figures of the time. I don't know if you all know some of them because they are quite in the Spanish sphere, but Francisco Pérez Bayer, Pedro Montegón, and El Conde de Comte of Florida Blanca, like very famous in this context. In his letters, it can be found some letters, specifically 12, that stand out for their emotionality, and these are the letters from his mother, because they were very, very close. We can talk about that later, but it seems because the letters that they have a very close relationship, and also he came back when his mother was ill, so he came back from Italy just in time for being with her mother and accompanying him in the process of pass away and so on. Mm-hmm. And Lassala just died like 3 years after his mother, so that's like quite shocking, because his mother was about 40 years older than him, but they died like in period of 3 years of difference. So you know, sometimes when a beloved one dies, some people die like in. So I don't know. So now I'm showing you the fragments, the letters, and I will explain a little bit about them. So this is an image of one letter from the microfilm. And yes, I have the fragments in Spanish, so to the one of you who can read the Spanish, so you can read it, and I will explain it in English, the content. So, a little bit the beginning. Aquí quedan aún bastantes sacerdotes franceses. Sin embargo, de los que han pasado a Rávena, Cércena, Rimini, etc., no puedo decir el número preciso que queda. So, he's talking about this and finish with a sentence: quiera Dios que se compongan las cosas de la Francia, porque si no será un trabajo para todos. So, this letter is from Juan Bautista Casanova. He was a friend of him, and wrote from Ferrara to Manuel. So one was in Ferrara and the other in Bologna. Casanova seems to be a friend of Lassala from Valencia and also a member of the company, but not like a full member at this time. So the French Revolution had special impact on the clergy who had lived to France, and as we see reflected in this fragment, go into the exile and take refuge in other Catholic countries such as Italy or Spain. So we can see how Casanova tells Lassala that the Archbishop of Ferrara at that time, Alessandro Mattei. So this person. So Alessandro Mattei is giving shelter and asylum to French priests, and Casanova assumes that more priests are also being welcomed to Valencia. Like was the last sentence of the passage. So here, Casanova expresses with great vividness his growing anguish over the revolution conflict and his desire for it to end soon. So it's like, it's something like, may God wants that the things of France be put right, because if not, it will be a job for everyone. So like it's like in more daily language, like it will be a mess if we don't have a solution for this soon. Okay. This second extract belongs to a letter dated a month later, and in this case, the letter is written by Lassala's mother from Valencia. In this extract, Inés Sangermán expresses her affliction for the exile suffered by her son and for not knowing when the expelled Jesuits will be allowed to return to Spain. Added to the situation of forced exile is that of the universal turmoil caused by the French Revolution, which is having consequences through Europe. So, the last sentence, las madres de estos pobres sacerdotes franceses me sirven de consuelo, pues ni aún tienen noticias de sus hijos ni les pueden socorrer con lo que tienen. So, his mother's uneasy accentuation when her concern over her son's prolonged absence is added to the uncertainty about the sociopolitical situation in relation to the revolution. In turn, Lassala's mother is what saying here in the bold letters, feels sorry for the mothers of the French priests who, unlike her, are unaware of the fate of her children and who cannot do anything for them. Okay, so we are going to the third extract. This extract refers to the chaplains and friars who have appeared previously in the same letter. The letter is incomplete and we only have the right page. We also don't know the date, which is probably in the left page. And it seems to belong to the same year or periods, and since it shares a theme with the fragments previously discussed. So the fragment talks about several French chaplains and friars, about 300 that have taken refuge in Valencia. They have been well received in the city. However, they seem to find political opposition from the French living in Valencia. It is said that the majority of French people residing in Valencia are of the Assembly Party, so that they are supporters of the revolution. Okay, so then we are going to extract 4 and 5. So the first of these two fragments alludes to the execution of Luis 16th, and Lassala's mother informs him that the French have killed the monarch. So in that moment, it's like, well, maybe you live in Bologna. How do you know the king has been killed? So it's informing by letter. Yes, and in the day of the St. Agnes. So she writes about her suffering and consternation, while at the same time she feels compassion for the Pope, in this case is Pius VI, and regrets all the hardships that he had to endure during his pontificate. The next extract, the extract 5, belonging to a letter from just a few weeks later, continues talking about the death of the King of France and the burning of the statue of the Pope in France, which make it clear that the French Revolution was not only trying to overthrow the old regime political, but also the Catholic Church in France. The letter goes on to say that the Archbishop calls for peace among the religious, so that the Archbishop is saying to the religious people, don't take revenge and act with precaución y dulzura, that it's something like caution and gentleness. So, like, don't be reactive to the revolution. Okay, and the last extract, I'm reading the bold sentences. La invasión que temes de los franceses, que tienen revuelta toda la Europa. En familia no hay novedad especial, pero todos han estado sangrados y asustados por la sensación que ocasionaron estos sustos. No he dejado la casa, habiendo dejado la suya a todos los parientes, hasta Joaquín está con su familia. So the last analyzed passage continues showing the restlessness that Lassala's mother feels about the beheading of the King of France and the inexorable advance of the French troops through Europe, who has already occupied the regions of Nice and Savoy. She revealed that the family Lassala Sangermán lives in fear of this new situation, and that many relatives, including his son Joaquin, along with his family, have abandoned their homes. But she's saying that for herself, she has remained strong, and she also was able to fast for the Lent, and she has not left the manor, so the manor is still there. So about the extracts, like, we can talk about this later, but as I said previously, some conclusion is like, for me, was very interesting, seeing that historical period from the perspective of a noble family linked to the Catholic Church and the company of Jesus. So the family Lassala Sangermán sees its status and integrity in danger, and obsessed with fear how the world they know is collapsing. And in the end, we have witnessed the events from sources that narrate unusual events like a revolution that burst in a daily life of a family. So presenting them from an intimate perspective of the revolution. So we have seen in turn the events through the eyes of a mother who suffers for a son in the exile, in the middle of the chaos that agitated Europe at that moment. So it's a point of view from the revolution that is not very usual. Okay, so now we are going to another topic, and I will to show a little bit an overview of the dramatic works of Lassala. So when he was in exile, Lassala produced most of his work. So Lassala's work includes various genres, mostly written in verse, such tragedy, lyric scene, comedy, satire, parable, or litany. From his dramatic production, we preserved 10 complete tragedies and part of another. generally of a neoclassical, religious, or courtly nature, as we say, like a court drama. It should also be noted that we preserve several hundred of poems, most of them sonnets, songs, and others, but many of these are simple academic exercise carried out in the occasion of social events or at the request of friends or relatives. So it's like we cannot consider like high poetry. So these are all the dramas that are published. We have some that are not published, and these are the neoclassical dramas. So the most important is Eugenia and Aulite. So we have two. The first one, the original one, let's say, written in Italian, but then it was translated in a few years into Spanish. So we preserved the two versions. And as you might know, in that period, or especially for the students, the translations weren't translations like nowadays. So the translators could change something, add some verbs, and whatever. Nowadays, if you are translating something, you are supposed to be loyal to the original. In these times, no. It's like, okay, I'm translating it, I'm changing it, and I'm like deleting some verses. Like they thought if they could improve in some way, so they do it. So yes, we can talk about that then. And yes, that's something I wanted to show you because there is a tragedy of Misinda that it's a little bit a copy of Moratín father, that's for the Spanish philology, that was called Ormesinda. So that also was in that time. Like almost anybody wrote new things. So they took something about Greek tragedians, Rustin, in that moment, Metastasio, that was opera librettist, and they changed it a little bit, take one of them, one of the other, and in their tragedies. So what Lassala did in that time was mostly that. So there is a tragedy, and then at the end of the tragedy, there are five scene lyrique. I will explain what is it. But first, I wanted to show you that because that's not the original, that's a translation, and I like a lot because it's a tragic. Well, I read it in Spanish and I will translate. So, tragedia escrita en verso suelto por don Manuel Lassala Sangermán, and then says traducida en español por un amigo suyo. So in English it means like yes, tragedy written in like 3 verses, and then said and translated into Spanish by some friend. So who knows who was the translator? It doesn't care. That's all. And then that friend wrote something like, I'm reading in Spanish because it's in verse, right? Como otro asunto mayor al presente no me ocupa, queriendo evitar el ocio, me divierto con la pluma. So it's like, okay, as I have nothing more to do, I will write that and translate. And all this, it seems like it's published, but not that's handwriting, but beautiful handwriting. Okay, so that's the main tragedy, and then there are the 5 scene lyrique. So scena lyrica or drama lirico is an opera subgenre that can also consider musical theater or melodrama. So it's a play, usually with a single act, with few characters, with a solemn plot, with music and lyrics. And they were written or performed, especially in the 18th century. So it was very popular. It's like a little opera. And yes, and very melodramatic. So the first one, it's Pygmalion. So it's a translation of Rousseau's Pygmalion, and Pygmalion myth was present in many works from the 18th century. The most known is the Goethe one, and in operettas, poems, and comedies. So this Skena topic is the sculptor's passionate love for his work and the moment in which it comes to life and he falls in love with his creation. So, well, I will read it in Spanish as I'm explaining it in English. Si la más, well, the origin, I will say that's the Russian version, Lassala's version in Italian, and the translation into Spanish are mine. So, si la más digna de entre todas las obras de mis manos, de mi corazón, no viviré más que para ti. So, here the protagonist is Pygmalion, and Galatea only have a few verses in all the schema. The other two could be considered as a continuum. So we have La Partenza de Enea and Di Donna Abbandonata. Both refer to the same mythologic passage from Virgil's Aeneid, and probably another inspiration for Lassala is Metastasio, Di Donna Abbandonata. And the topic of these two scenas is the abandonment by Aeneas of the Queen of Carthage, after having had a loving relationship with her, and her subsequent despair and suicide. So if you know the history, so like they have an affair and then he left, and Guido commits suicide. And this was a very popular literary and dramatic topic since the classical era. So in fact, Lassala, I think he wrote like very popular things for the court, for the entertainment of the noble families. Because nowadays, especially for the students, I think not you in concrete, but in general, they think, oh, what boring thing or whatever. But in that moment, that was like very popular literature, like a Netflix series. It wasn't like a very thing for think a lot or very philosophically or whatever. Not, it was pure entertainment for the moment, because we need to think that was with music, while they were singing, they were with the beautiful costumes, and yes, it was like pure entertainment. Okay, yeah, that's the original of the Di Donna Abbandonata. Okay, yeah, and that's also like the text in Italian and the translation into Spanish. Okay, so the next is Il Misanthropo. It's based on Molière's Le Misanthrope. So you can see that they were copying the French a lot. And yes, in turn, Molière's Misanthrope was based on ancient Greek new comedy, Terentius comedy, and probably Menander's Discourse. Some authors think yes, and some authors think not. So Lassala takes Molière's plot, the disappointed man with the world that surrounds him, and then make it simple, Christianizes, and change the genre from comedy to melodrama. The main character is a melancholic man that has faith in fortune and divinity, and he defends pure caste love through friendship and virtue. And he laments about his wife's infidelity, and he thinks about suicide also. So we can discuss about it, because one of the interesting things in that period is the Christianization of the classical myths and the adaptation to the Baroque and so on, because some ancient tragedies could be Christianized and some of them not. So there are some that were very fashionable in that time and others not. Okay, so I will finish with Andromaca, this another Scena Lyrica, and Iphigenia. Iphigenia was wrote first, but as it's like the most important tragedy, I left that from the end. So in general, there are, I don't know if they're limited, but there are less studies on Euripides Andromache and Iphigenia Naulis because they haven't been the most popular tragedies, and compared from Euripides Medea or Sophocles Oedipus Rex. So it could be said that traditionally classicist literary critics have like neglected them a little bit, like Iphigenia and Andromaca. But nevertheless, with the success of Racine's Andromache in the 17th century, the Andromaca and Iphigenia myths achieved a substantial popularity in the dramatic arts and in the 7th century in Western Europe, and theater, opera, and other subgenres. So if Andromaca and Iphigenia were so popular in that time, it was because of Racine. So, okay, for the Andromaca, the main sources for this Scena Lyrica are Euripides and Seneca's The Trojan Women, and Metastasios Lekinesi. Metastasios is all the time also in that moment. And also it has been influenced by Euripides Andromache, but less. The leitmotif of this melodrama is Andromache's suffering as a widow of Hector, and her immeasurable anguish as a mother for the son who is going to be sacrificed. So Lassala's greatest innovation compared to its sources is that he writes about Iphigenia's sacrifice in the Andromache and establishes a parallelism with Astyanax, like the son of Andromache. So the sacrifice of Iphigenia is more popular, but he establishes that parallelism. Okay, so just reading that quickly. Pero cielo, qué suerte es esta, esposa y madre, yo siento el corazón dividido, lacerándome, o esposo o hijo. So the moment with Andromaca is suffering because she needs to sacrifice her son. So that could be like compared with Clytemnestra. We can also discuss that later because the classic Clytemnestra is not considered a very good woman because she kills her husband and so on. But then in that period, Clytemnestra is Christianized. Like she's a mother that is suffering because her husband killed their child or her child. So the myths evolve depending on the period and depending in which part of the myth the author wants to put the focus. Okay, so we are going to the Iphigenia, so that's the first edition in Italian and the second edition translated into Spanish. So for his Iphigenia, Lassala takes as main sources Euripides' Iphigenia Naulis and Racine again, Iphigenia. So he confesses that, so say something like, without forgetting the teachings of art and the non-Slavish imitation of the Greek Euripides and the other Euripides of France, the immortal Racine. So in that period, it's like Racine and Euripides were seen like equals. So that's very important for knowing how the French literature was influencing the Italian literature and the next literature. So what Lassala doesn't confess is he also took the final of the tragedy from the opera Gluck's opera Iphigenie Enaulide, written by, that's long surname, Gan Lebrun Doulet, based also in Racine's writing. I'm giving a little finish, so that's the opera of Gluck with the music and the lyrics. We have the whole opera, like the yeah. So the main topic is the sacrifice of Iphigenia. The sacrifice of Iphigenia, classic myth. So Iphigenia is the menstrual daughter, and she is sacrificed to the goddess Artemis by her father, Agamemnon, and Lassala Christianized the myth, preserving the Greek mythological elements. That's because some of them try to give the Greek gods away, but Lassala keeps the gods and the mythological Greek system, but also mixed with some Christian expressions. And the main thing is like provides the myth with a lieto fine, like a happy ending that was very fashionable in the Baroque opera. So in the end, Achilles is the savior and saves Iphigenia and marries her, and everybody is happy. But that the opera, the Gluck's opera, had this ending too. So even that wasn't very innovative. So I think by my part, that's all by the moment. So thank you. Now I think we can talk and discuss some of the topics if you would like. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Maybe you can stop sharing. Yeah. Then we can see other audience. So let's start with questions. Thomas, maybe you have.
Yeah, I do. Is it audible? Okay, so I have quite a lot of them. So we already mentioned some details about his plays, like Iphigenia, Pygmalione, Partenza Danea, and so on. And I'm wondering how much they are original, how much they are copied, how much they're influenced by the classical authors, or they're just rewritings of some sort of, tendencies that are there in the Italian context. That's the first question.
Okay, so I will start with that. So, for example, about the Iphigenia, of course, they are not like copies, but the argument is taken from other authors. Take Euripides and Racine, and as I said, he confesses that because it's prestigious, but also took like Gluck's opera, and that's not confessive in the prologues of the tragedy, because that was more close to the time he wrote it. So what he does, and I think that was like very popular in that moment, is like taking some famous versions of the tragedy, rewrite it, because of course they needed he needed to write it in verse in Italian, so the dialogues and so on are not the same, and you need to master the writing in verse in Italian, of course. And also I think he put the focus on being a proper Christian tragedy that could be an inspiration for the young ladies of the court, because it's dedicated to a young lady. And about the Andromache, for example, he took an opera of Metastasio that is Le Cinesti. I don't know if it rings a bell to some of you or not. So Metastasio said, okay, I'm doing a meta theater. So he makes an opera that is settled in China. So it's the title is The Chinese Women. So there are 3 Chinese young ladies that they are born in China. And also there is a young man. So they say, what can we do for spending the evening and amuse herself? So they say, okay, we will represent some operas or some tragedies like here in the home. So it's like meta theater. And one of that little place inside the opera is the Andromaca. So what Lassala does is not going very directly to the classic Andromacas, but going to that Italian Metastasio's Andromacas, and it's the main source. Of course, she could read Greek because he was a teacher of ancient Greek. So I suspect he also read the originals in Greek and so on. But maybe yes, the Baroquism of these times also had a great influence of the French influence, the Italian influence of Metastasio, and also he might have studied theater when he was in the Jesuit college. So the Jesuit theater was like they try to give morals in all the place. So it's that I think he tries to do, and also being like very spectacular, because that's the Baroque era, like putting like effects in the stage, or the costumes like very spectacular. So of course we don't have the representations, but they should be like very focused, not also in the text, but also in the performance, like doing it like very spectacular for the audience in a private theater and audience, because they were represented in the ballad for the novels of Bologna. It's like not in a public theater. So I think more or less is that, and I don't know if you have another question, Thomas.
Yeah, if I may, because I don't see the audience, so sorry if I'm just jumping in. Because you mentioned like influences from other Italian authors, I also was wondering, when you were presenting these excerpts from his dramas, also the names, he's very, very mythological in a way that classical, well, neoclassical, as you said. But in that time in Italy, it was not that much popular. For example, Vincenzo Monti, who was from the Accademia degli Arcadi, he just wrote several of plays that were neoclassical per se. Or Vittorio Alfieri, I don't know, Maffei also a bit earlier. So they were not really diving that much deep into these classical narratives, but they were kind of trying to create something brand new. So why do you think I forgot the name, but the author you presented,
Yes,
why he's so much into these classical narratives?
I think, of course, everybody in that moment studied at least Latin, but not everybody had like a deep knowledge of Greek language and Greek culture. So for him, that was different. And also that was part of my research, like trying to know what did he study, and if I could try what did he read, because some of the authors of this period, they didn't really could read ancient Greek. Maybe they could read some translations, but he really was into the Greek culture, as he was a Greek teacher. So I think he really has like an interest in the Greek mythology, and she preserves quite well all the Greek divinities and the myths. Of course, she needs to put like the morals in it, like making it like more Christian. Also, giving the happy ending is also moral philosophical decision, because if Iphigenia is innocent without sin, she shouldn't die. So the Christianization is okay. The sacrifice is there, the goddess is there, but in the end, she married Achilles. That is a very nice thing to do. And the moral is, if you are a good person or a good girl, you will have good things. If she had killed Iphigenia in the tragedy, that wouldn't work, because, well, I don't know in general, how do you know the myth of Iphigenia and so on? No, basically more for Greek tragedy. So you know that he's going to be sacrificed, but in the end, he's not sacrificed, and a deer is sacrificed in her place. But that ending is quite a few centuries posterior to the original Euripides tragedy. So we don't know what really happened in the original tragedy. And then Racine said, okay, we are in the 7th century and killing a deer is not a good thing. We need to kill someone, because that solution, Deus ex machina, is like very nice. So Racine what does is killing Iphianassa, that is a daughter of Helen of Troy, and says, okay, Helen of Troy is a bad woman, his daughter has the thing from her, so let's kill her and have an actual killing. But Lassala says, okay, I can't kill a girl, because I'm going to be like a very happy or like a moral thing. Neither can put the deer to be sacrificed, because that solution of Deus ex machina is like quite old-fashioned. So yes, I will take Gluck's ending that is suitable for me. Like in the ending, Achilles, that was supposed to be also be foolish to marry Iphigenia, but that was not a real marriage. So in that version, Achilles says, I'm the hero, I'm saving the girl, and I'm marrying her. So it preserves quite a lot of the mythological structure, but adapting it, and also puts like some more contemporary expressions like "oh heavens" or whatever, that in an ancient Greek tragedy wouldn't be that. So like some Christian expressions, put it here and there, also to make it like more contemporaneous.
Thomas, do you hear me when I speak from the audience? The authors you mentioned, they were also Jesuits, or they're like drama?
No Jesuits, just dramatists. They are playwrights.
Because I think this classical tradition was popular among Jesuits, like Jesuits theater. But I wonder if these happy endings wasn't made because were made because of the court theater tradition, because they were showed for big big celebrations
like
and
weddings.
like weddings. So how to end the play with sacrifice and end it with to show their like this occasion by they were written. Okay. Do we have any questions? More questions?
I will listen back to the initials of your research. What first?
You can ask you in Spanish and I can.
But I would like what first took your attention, the author, his works, or the history that you presented us so interesting in the beginning of the presentation? What was your personal, how you get in touch with this theme?
Okay, so I think it was a little bit by chance, because I started researching when I was in my degree. I had a scholarship for research in my last year. So I started with humanism and that kind of thing. But then, while I was doing while I was doing my master's courses and so on, I really knew I would like to work with theater and tragedy and so on. So in that moment, so it's like we needed to find a middle point. And one of my advisors in that moment was I was in my master's told me, so I have an Iphigenia from the 18th century. The Iphigenia wasn't, it's not, it wasn't edited or before my thesis. So it was there, hidden from the 18th century. She told me I found it in the historical library. Maybe you would be interested in studying it and so on. So I started with the Iphigenia, but of course there wasn't no much context in that moment of the author. So a professor who passed away has researched him in the 90s, so have some research about it, not about the Iphigenia. So I started with the Iphigenia, and also I started to research more about the context, the life of the author. So I needed to go to the archives and everything that was said about him was not very actual, only that things from the 90s, and I needed to go to the sources and the archives from the 18th century, 19th century, that the people who lived in that period of little bit after wrote about it. And yes, and then I found the manuscripts that at that moment weren't in the catalog of the library. They were in the catalog of the 19th century, so it's like it was registered that they exist, but that weren't in the modern catalogs. So yes, I work a lot with the manuscripts, with the microfilms. Now, some of them are digitalized, but when I started my PhD, there wasn't about any information about him or the tragedies or whatever. So it's like one thing where to the other. So now, if you go into internet, you can find him, but in that moment, no. And it was very curious because when I restart some research about him, so I say, okay, let's see what's new or what's now in digital format or whatever. And I discovered that now he was in the historical dictionary of biographies of Spain, like the RAE, the Dictionary de la Real Academia, but about history. So I was reading that, okay, that's now in the historical dictionary and so on. And I started reading, I said, that rings a bell to me, like and then I look, and the main source for the historical biography dictionary was me. So on my articles. So it's like in the last years, I think I'm the person alive who was writing about him. So yes, it's like I started with Virginia, and then with all the context, of course, I needed to study the context of the Jesuits, like in general, because about the author there was not a lot. And yes, it's like then I went into branches, like in some papers working more about some tragedies or some mythological things, in other about the philosophical aspects of the Jesuits, and that with the letters, that also was like anecdotic history about how I found them and so on.
More questions?
Yes, may I ask one? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So my question refers to the first part of your presentation, which concerned the French Revolution. I was wondering what significance the events of the revolution had for Lassala, sort of personally, whether that affected the neoclassical aesthetic that he employed. Did he stick to it, or did he turn away because it was such a moment of cultural rupture in places like France and English, for example, right? That we speak of the inauguration of the romantic aesthetic really with the eruption of the French Revolution. So I'm just wondering if that had any impact on Lassala personally, and if that affected other Spanish writers, not necessarily Jesuits either. Like, what was the cultural significance of this for the Spanish?
Okay, so for Lassala specifically, as we don't preserve the letters he wrote, we can't know it exactly, but yes, it affected also in Italy. But I think Italy was like an oasis for of course, for the Catholic Church and the expelled. So I think they were more afraid in Spain, for example, than in Italy. So Italy was like a safe space for the exiled Catholics and so on. And in his works, I think he continued more or less in the same line of that neoclassical theater of court and so on. As I said, like Italy seemed to be more safe space. But in Spain, of course, it was an inflection point, because in Spain were like two ways. So one were called afrancesados, so were the Spanish that were in favor of the revolution and in favor of French. And that's a thing that I think it continued thanks nowadays. So some people in Spain, also politicians and intellectuals, that Florida Blanca, that was in the letters, some of them really were like French thinkers. So they assimilate the French culture, the French literature, the French philosophy, and became like very, very French. And others say like, yes, like the ones who like France and French like culture were like, I don't know, more weak, more effeminated, like that was like a kind of. And then when Napoleon was expanding the empire, so the French said, okay, we are going to conquer Portugal, so maybe we can pass to Spain. And the thing is, they tried to conquer Spain also, but they were expelled. So I think that was a thing of yes, a little bit like two cultures that are neighbors, and in some periods, French literature and French culture are close. But also there is a rivalry between France and Spain. So before English was the most predominant language in Europe, we used to study French like a compulsory subject in Spain. And for me, I studied when English was compulsory, not French. But in my school, we also studied French, that it was like optional, but in my school was compulsory, so French and English. But also there is a great connection with Italy. So I think is in Spain, speaking culturally, since many centuries ago, there are some movements more linked to Italy and other more linked to France. And for example, also in university and so on, the colleagues from my generation, we all knew or studied more or less French, maybe then a little bit of Italian. But the younger colleagues, they have studied Italian, but not French. So I think that it's changing depending on the period. Like we are more close to France or more in rivalry with France.
We have more questions. I have one. He was a contemporary to Goya. So, and they seem very different artists, very different. So somehow maybe we can say that he was more Italian author than Spanish, or somehow the Jesuit context made him so different from his epoch, from his period.
I think he was quite Italian, and because he spent like 30 years in Italy. So yes, I think half of her life or more. So, and also there were like the Jesuits thing. Also, I think it made a difference, because I think he was like not a controversial author. So she took the things that were fashionable, make it in a nice, pretty way, but he was not disruptive or trying to make a very personal literature or something like this. And for example, he also copied some Spanish authors, more Latin, but like very classical or bourgeois Spanish author, not the ones who were like producing like new. Yeah, and I think that's also a thing of Spanish art and literature, that we always have like two movements or two way of thinking, very different, and that's in every period. I think we are a very polarized nation and country, and even nowadays it's like we are very radical one way or another, and we are not very in the middle, never. So it's like very different ways so far can coexist in the same era.
Okay. So Almodovar and
I don't know, maybe Amenábar, that it's like more Hollywood.
And could it be possible that the boy was under the influence of
You can say it in Spanish or in French.
esa es la cosa de iglesia cuando te gusta las brujas?
¿Casa de brujas?
No, eso. Ладно, шайбу
teatro,
tiesiog tas reiškias bažnytinė tas persekiojimas raganų. Tai tas tam buvo labai
about the Inquisition.
Oh,
fue tan fuerte que incluyó las demás que eran extranjeros, los escritores, por ejemplo, esa casa de niños fue parado y tuve que pasar por el juicio. No
yes,
podía exponer.
yes, it is about the Spanish Inquisition in general. Well, it's like we have, as it says, like the black legend of the Spanish Inquisition, and we were to America and so on. So yes, of course, in Spain, where we were burning people in front of the cathedral, that's a fact, in many cities. And for example, it was also the expulsion of the Jewish from Spain, and the destruction of the Jewish culture and religion in Spain, because we had three religions coexisting, like the Christian, the Muslim, and the Jewish. The Muslims were expelled into Africa after eight centuries being in Spain, and also in that humanistic period, the Jewish were expelled or burned or forced to profess Christianity if they want to survive. So yes, of course, all that had an influence and an impact in the culture, and for example, the Jewish culture in Spain almost disappeared, but we had the Jewish roots. In fact, my second surname is from Jewish root. So the Jews who convert into Christians so will survive. So yes, the Inquisition was a thing that made the authors censorate themselves, because you couldn't show a lot, and then of course in the 20th century, we had the dictatorship and also not the Inquisition, but we had that death punishment until the 70s, so it's not very far away. So yeah, we had more liberal eras, some periods that, yes, like writers and intellectuals were afraid. For example, in the 20th century, some of them went into France, like Picasso.
Others were killed, like Lorca.
Yes, Lorca. Yes, Lorca was killed in the beginning of the Civil War.
But were Jesuits connected with the Inquisition?
I'm not really sure, but I guess not a lot, because Jesuits were known for being like the avant-garde of the church and the more progressive and the ones who were more linked with science and culture. So I think,
So
yes,
the king made them to leave Spain, but the king let the Inquisition to stay in Spain.
well, in that moment, we didn't have Inquisition per se. And also, yes, it's like, it was real, but also like more, as I said, like the Black Legend, because there were more Inquisition in Spain than in other places of Europe.
Yeah, okay.
But as the Catholic Church had that strength, let's say, it seems like the inquisitorial things were harder in Spain, but that hunting of witches was also in Germany, in England. So, and that was more in medieval and humanistic times, but in the 20th century wasn't something that was happening.
So, do we have any more questions?
No, okay, questions.
Okay.
So I mean, very interesting insights. For the vision is the thing apart. So now there is one woman, Filipino woman. I think it's a video who is talking in the radio and writing and investigating that the Black Legion of the Spanish Inquisition was a legion created by British and Netherlands propaganda. So it was not so as we have as a topic as this keep in our minds. It's something really different. Just it's better not to fall down in those topics. But what surprised me about that the tragedies with the author were not the tragedies. Well, you just missed this part. It was waiting in Encanto. Todos mueren y me encanta. When I said that, I loved it, you know. So it's surprising. The tragedy is just being tragedies.
Yes, they start being melodramas.
So Maria, thank you very much.
For coming and being here, inside. So it was a pleasure for me.
Can I say goodbye to audience?
Goodbye.
Abroad.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Have a nice evening.
Have a nice evening, you too. Bye bye.
Well,